This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is sponsored by the Fire Store. Learn more about getting the gear you need at prices you can afford by visiting thefirestore.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Better Every Shift podcast. My name is Aaron Zamzow. I'm a fire officer and author here on Fire Rescue One. Just trying to put together a show to give you some usable, tangible, actionable things that can make you better as an officer, person, whatever you're doing. I'm not alone, of course. I have some really, really special guests. One that you're probably familiar with. She's outranked today, by the way, though, so stay tuned for that. We got the commander, Janelle Fosquet, the editor-in-chief of Fire Rescue One. Janelle, how are we doing?
Doing good, although I'm feeling ashamed of you even calling me the commander today. I don't deserve the title today. Let's just
Well, you
eliminate.
are outranked today because with us we have a very special guest. I don't know how you actually even got a guest of this caliber. He way outranks us, and just reading and looking at his resume is very impressive. Before I get into that, though, I want to welcome Admiral Mike Studeman, who is an author, a leader. He's got probably more stories that he can't tell us about than he can. But Admiral, welcome to the show and thanks for being here. How are you?
Hey, Zam, it's great to be here. Janelle, good to see you. Look forward to your questions, and thanks for taking the time to delve into leadership some more. I think everybody can benefit.
You wrote a book, and the reason this is so significant because I read the book cover to cover. We were talking off camera about it. I am not a reader from the standpoint of it's a lot of effort for me, and I was complimenting the book, The Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity, and we're gonna talk about the book. But I just wanted to give you a compliment and say it is well written for someone who has kind of a smaller attention span. I think I have 10 pages worth of just, usable things that we can, take back to our crews here in the fire service. Now, your background is on the naval side. You were the former commander of the Office of the Naval Intelligence and a retired two-star admiral. You're one of the nation's leading national security professionals. You've led intelligence operations at every level, from the tactical to the strategic, and in the Navy Joint National and interagency assignments. You have some very special clearances. You've also supported combat operations ranging from Desert Storm to the Balkans and Afghanistan. Now you're retired, and all the things that you've done, the clearances, and the different things you experienced. Out of all of those things, what was the biggest reason for writing the book, and really where are your aspirations now that you're retired?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, Zam. Lots of compliments there. I did 35 years in the Navy, and I was looking at my transition and said, how do I continue to contribute? Because you can retire, which means taking off the uniform, but that doesn't mean that you give up your obligation to keep feeding it, back, paying it forward, however you want to talk about that. And so, I dedicated myself to say, listen, the journey, the mission continues. We're going to have to find different ways to exercise leadership now without title or rank. How do you do that? What's the right thing to do for others who may be starting out or maybe struggling with leadership challenges? And, I could have written on a number of things. I could have written about anything in the Indo-Pacific or maritime, global affairs, intelligence. And I chose leadership because I looked around, and unfortunately, there are a lot of examples of poor leadership that exist in our society today. And there's like a cancer that's grown. Some of the poor leaders are normalizing behavior, which in the long run actually are very toxic to society, to organizations, et cetera. And I thought now's the time for an additional voice to come into play and say, look, there are other ways, better ways, honorable, ethical ways to lead. That people just need to hear those stories and to try to counteract maybe some of the poorer examples that were showing up across our national scene.
Yeah, and this is something that's deep rooted in you. I mean, you come from a family background where I believe you said your father, and then you have a sister that's also involved. Does your dad outrank you?
My dad retired as a 4-star admiral, and he will continue to outrank me for the rest of my life. The great thing about him, though, he's a very humble guy, and always treats people as equals. And it doesn't matter if you're the janitor or your secretary, doesn't matter if you're the president or the secretary of defense. He treats everybody the same. So for me, he was a great example of how to do it right, because ultimately leadership is about how you behave with one another, right? Are you truly expressing the golden rule in every respect? How do you do that at the small scale, also at the large scale, when you have thousands of people working for you? And to me, watching my father not change who he was or how he did business, no matter, what ranks he had as he became more senior, it really was sort of a lesson in being. He was a model for me throughout my early years. And of course, he continues to be a source of great advice to me.
What's like the holidays like? Do you guys have to have like secret agents outside, or what, like, lead walls? Because there's a lot of intelligence between your family members there, right? What is that like?
Yeah, that's funny, because I was telling you that my younger sister had worked for DARPA before, a lot of classified programs, whatever. Sometimes we go outside on the back porch, and in hushed tones we might talk about certain things, or we get a little bit closer. But we're all very good at essentially implying or getting close, going, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And so you don't have to actually be revealing secrets. So if somebody had a huge disc on the other side of the river or something, they couldn't actually pick up on anything classified. But speaking in code among Intel people is kind of the way we generally do business, and so that's how it's done. But trust me, if you show up at my next Thanksgiving party, you're going to be disappointed about what you take away from it.
Just a normal family, right? You're just a normal, like you were saying, the challenge is, do I address you as admiral? Do I address you as commander? And you go, no, I'm Mike. I'm like, well, Mike with a super high clearance and a ton of stories and a ton of knowledge. But I love the way that you said that. You're like, your dad taught you to just speak to everybody, whether they're the janitor or the defense secretary or secretary of defense, the same. And, I think that goes into just being human, number one. And then, one of the biggest things we talk about with leadership, and it just seems like poll after poll, American workers don't really trust their leaders, or believe in government leaders. And is that another thing that you saw? And what are some of the things that we can do to kind of change that or reverse that?
Yeah, the statistics were really disturbing when you took a look at a number of different polls that were taken, U.S. News will Report, Gallup, et cetera, and they were talking about, hey, 4 out of 5 people don't trust their leaders. 4 out of 5 don't trust, corporate leaders or government leaders. Only 1 out of 3 trust mass media, and the list goes on. 2% trust Congress to do the right thing. I mean, it's just like incredible across every sector of our society. We have a leadership crisis. And so, I wanted to offer a way to navigate out of this crisis, to say, look, let's reground ourselves on these fundamental traits of successful leadership that actually haven't changed very much throughout all of humankind. You can choose to discipline yourself and use these techniques, or you can resort to something that's maybe a little lazier, a little easier, a little more emotional, and you're going to end up being just another toxin in the system. How do you actually be, something that counters those toxins and becomes more of a positive, uplifting voice in your circle, whatever that is?
Mm-hmm.
And Admiral, it's so fitting that we're talking to you today, because we've talked about this on other podcasts, but every year Fire Rescue One does this state of the industry survey. This year's theme was basically how to fix poor agency leadership. And the reason we focused on that is because in the previous 2 surveys, even though they were about other topics, poor agency leadership kept rising to the top. We're reading between the lines. Some of it's anecdotal, qualitative, where people are writing about it. And some of it is just, it's rising to the top in some of these survey questions as the number one factor that was driving people out of the fire service, contributing to retention issues.
Yeah, you have to really diagnose, different organizations, different cultures, what's really going on. There's no like one explanation that's universal. There's a variety of ways things can go south on you. And so are these things leaders are doing or things that leaders are not doing? Are they crimes of commission or crimes of omission? And so being able to first diagnose well becomes really important before you try to run off, half cocked to try to get some kind of solutions. You may think it's just one person and it's the top person, when in fact there's something systematically going on. It doesn't matter who the senior person is. There's something else at work here, and you have to really understand that well and get your forensics right before you try to get the prescription.
In the book, Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity, what's the significance? And I as I read through this, I thought it was really cool. But talk about the chain for a little bit, and kind of why you are really focusing on that as your beginning point or your starting point.
Yeah, thanks, Zam. So Might of the Chain actually is a phrase that comes out of one of the laws of the Navy. It's a long poem that was first penned by a British naval officer who became an admiral. And then around the 1900s, the U.S. Navy, and particularly the Naval Academy, took up these laws of the Navy. And the fifth law of the Navy is one of the most memorable. And it says, essentially, on the strength of one link in a cable dependeth the might of the chain. Who knows when thou may be tested, so live that thou may bearest the strain. So might of the chain is essentially this allusion to the idea that we're all individual links, but we're also part of our chains of existence. And so we're part of families, we're part of organizations, we're part of teams. And your link needs to be strong, and it needs to flush fit with other links. And you're not going to get any heavy lifting done in life if everybody's links are shattered and you can't interlink, to get things done. So how do you actually work on yourself to be a very strong individual link? How well do you link together with other team members, and then do the heavy lifting that's required of you with some of the big tasks of our organizations or our nations or whatever? And so that's the reason I picked the title, but I also broke the book down that way. So the first section, 17 odd chapters, is about that, work on you. And then the next set of chapters, 15, 18, they focus on what it takes to build that team, right? And then the third part is, all right, now you're going to take that team, you're going to do some amazing things. What are those leadership traits when it comes to deploying for the outcomes that you want, for the effects that you want to see? And so that's the general organizational breakdown for the book.
You read my notes, because I was just going to say, I was like, and that's what I really like, how you start with forging yourself, shaping your team, then obviously, and then finally, then you can transform your world. But they have to happen in that order, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And sometimes and I think you mentioned this before, sometimes people start shaping their team and their own self they haven't forged themselves. And out of those three things, which is probably the most difficult thing?
I think working on yourself can be very difficult, but working with others too. I mean, you got equal challenges, I think, because people are so very different. And so making links kind of work well with one another, with the different personalities and temperaments, and people have their own sort of life issues. That's just as challenging. So I wouldn't come down to say one's easier or better than the other. It depends on who you are and kind of what your natural gifts may be, or how far you've already kind of worked on yourself. For some people, they from day one, they're trying to self-improve, and they're knocking it out of the park, right? And their biggest challenges come when they start to engage other members of the team. Those people, clearly team is going to be more challenging. Then there are other people who somehow can't see themselves or introspect or, work on some of the hard things that it takes to develop yourself on your own personal journey. And, there can be some denialism there, and those people maybe work pretty well with a team, but they're bringing something into the team that they haven't worked on enough. And then you become a rusted or corroded, link, and potentially those fissures can break when the testing point comes, right? So it sort of depends, I guess.
Yeah. And it's a process too, right? It's not like you're done with one phase of it and then you move to the next. It's right. Like it's an ebb and flow, probably a spectrum throughout career, and relating it back to your career. I mean, which phase do you think you're in right now, and where are you placing the emphasis?
Yeah, you're right. It's a continuum. And if you think that you can rest on your laurels and you're done, that's when you start to actually have this sort of silent corruption there, because everyone has to maintain that growth, keep learning, keep listening, whatever. That there's some people that are that way, and some people fix themselves. They fix themselves when they were 18 or they're 25 or they're 35. And you have to beware, because if you stop learning, you're not developing. And every leader needs to be on a continual development curve. My challenge, which I learned of pretty way late in some of the examinations as an admiral, I was given a test that was a new kind of test that was being done, and I found that I was like this risk taker, that I was like on the extreme with SEALs and pilots and things like that. And they said they hadn't seen that in like any of these other fields that weren't sort of actively driving platforms or shooting weapons and things like that. And it wasn't because I can go out and be a SEAL, right? It's because for some reason I'm wired to just drive where others may stop, right? And I'm less concerned about it. And I don't know why. But it shows up when I do sports and things like that, right? Adventure racing, or being out in the wilds and surfing or diving or whatever. And I didn't know that about myself. And so that made me think, am I being too risky with my organization about the following things? Because now I'm representing the entire organization. That was an insight that I did not have when I was younger. And the second issue is patience for me. I'm fundamentally impatient, and I've had to calibrate myself. I'm aware of it. I've been aware of it for some time. Working on it is sort of a constant thing. I need to remind myself, be careful of overdriving. My people are expecting too much too soon, while still trying to put your foot down on the accelerator. How do you not go into the redlining of your RPM so that the engine, brakes, right? That's always been a challenge for me.
Yeah. But that's all because you're very self-aware. And I wanted to first start with some tips that you can give our listeners. And if you are listening, by the way, I highly recommend to go over to our YouTube channel, because the Admiral's 58 years old and he does not look a day over 38. And it's probably because it's obviously because he follows some of the things that he includes in the book. But then again, that's just a pitch for you to watch this in video. And when you talk about self-development, it sounds like it's a constant process, which you just elaborated on as you learned some things about yourself as you got older and got experience. For our listeners, or hopefully now viewers, give us a couple of things and highlights. I don't want to give away too much of what's included in the book, but some of the things I really thought were great were the mentions about there's always stresses. Get used to stresses. You mentioned some things on accountability and character. I love the stuff on vigor, communication, and then of course, self-care. So with all of those, what 3 or 4 things would you like our listeners to take away when it comes to, forging yourself?
Yeah, I think that first of all, character is the central issue. And people have said, if you have character, nothing else matters. If you don't have character, nothing else matters. So that's got to be kind of that strong central pillar, the foundation of your house. And if you don't have that, if you don't have good character, that begins to, essentially set lots of minds in a minefield all around you, and they will blow up. Because fundamentally, people can't trust you. If they can't believe that you're good intentioned, that you're doing something for the right reasons, not just about you, your ego, your wallet, your, whatever, your own success. If people see that you're like that, right, you're out for number one and you don't care about anything else, there's a reflection of poor character. There's a reflection of, lack of a moral basis of understanding kind of the needs of people around you. Then people aren't going to get behind you. And some people are very, very good at masking poor character. Some of them are not. In our political life, you look around and people don't care anymore. You can't even shame them that they have bad character. And so anyway, that's central. I would say that your own authenticity is also very important in terms of being who you are, because once again, this comes down to, can people trust you? And if people see that you're faking it, they don't know who you are really. They're suspicious of you. Why are you holding back, or what else should I know about you? And it's an instinctive thing. They'll never tell you. Nobody's going to say, hey, I'm not sure it's the real you showing up.
Yeah.
It's not that. But you'll see that people will be drawn into somebody who's themselves just comfortable in their own skin, who can own their own flaws, who knows their weaknesses and strengths, and manages to kind of work around those. But people want you to get real with them. They don't want you to pretend to be something that you're not. And so Hollywood has created this idealized sense of a leader is always taking command. They're doing most of everything. They're charging ahead. They're just issuing orders left and right. And that's just not reality. That's a myth of leadership, that you have to be one way in order to be successful. And it's not that way. You got, billions of people on the planet, and therefore there are billions of ways that you can stylize your leadership to be effective. And you have to understand that, to say, look, I'm comfortable with my background, my roots, like where I'm from, and I'm gonna make the most of that, and I'm gonna make connections where I can, right? And so authenticity is the second one, and then a third one I would offer is the self-discipline piece. If you're not self-disciplined, you can't take a look at your own development and make the right kind of refinements to the way that you're learning, the way that you're behaving, the way that you kind of look at yourself. You can't introspect to the point of paralysis, where everything you do is suspect. You're like, oh my God, I should have said that word instead of the other one. So there's a fine line between being like too hard on yourself, too critical, but also, the other side of it, not caring at all to kind of review how you may have done something better. So if you can find that happy medium, and then the self-discipline, once you have the identification of those things you may need to, to work on, to continue to sort of reach out and find out ways to learn, either from other people, other examples, immersing yourselves in other environments, all of that takes a motivation. Your battery has to be charged up to be able to actually make those changes and become stronger, more well-equipped for the things that you're going to face down the road.
So Admiral, I highlighted this this line in the book, and I think it's a really, really valid point for us in the fire service, because I think sometimes what you just described takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of looking in the mirror and doing a lot of self-evaluation, self-awareness. And I think sometimes we have a tendency in the fire service to say, hey, I'm serving others, I don't really need to look in the mirror. I'm just going to give so I don't have to. And you have this line in here that says, leading from the front should not always mean leaving oneself behind.
Yeah, this is so when it comes to balance and self-care, sometimes we take a look at leadership and we go, I essentially have to extinguish myself and everything that makes me tick in order to contribute to the team. And the reality is that if you do that, then you leave yourself, just a kind of a smoking crater. And you have to be wiser than that. Yes, you will be giving a lot to everyone all the time. But at some point, you have to understand when that's eating into your energy supply to the point where you become less than your best self, or less able to actually carry out your responsibility. And so people are looking at you. Look, if you're in any position there and they watch you hollow yourself out and become, a shell of what you were, right? Because you're just giving hours after hour, you're not getting your sleep, you're not working out. People are going to take a look and go, I don't want to be like that person. I don't want to be like the senior person here. I'm punching. I'm out of here. This person hasn't been able to find balance in their life, so they're not living out what they tell me about, balancing things either. And so there's a say-do gap. So yeah, you have to preserve something for yourself. Put your own oxygen mask on first, as somebody might say. And so where's the line to be drawn? That's up to you. You draw the line. You know how much you can give before it really starts to snap back at you and hurt you in ways that prevent you from actually bringing it when you need to bring it, right? Mm-hmm. How can you still be energetic and positive and uplifting if you're feeling tired, pessimistic, and cynical, and you're worried about other things that are blowing up in your family life, right? Because you've been giving too much in one area. So I talk about, remember the seesaw, illusion that I use? Look, when you're always going to be on a seesaw. That's just the way it is, right? We surge when we have to surge, and then we can recover. But you got to know when the ground is approaching so you can push off with your feet. And if you don't push off with your feet, you get the butt hit. And the butt
get the
hit
bounce.
like shivers through your spine, right?
Yeah, right. But, and that's, for some of us, some people are like, well, I kind of like the butt hit, right? The problem is there's someone on the other side, right? They absorb that butt hit, right? And that's something that we don't grasp is, right? Because I remember now as a kid, like, oh, give me the butt hit. And then the other person goes flying off, breaks, right? And that's part of that balance that we have to understand. There's somebody on that other side. And I think it's a great analogy and summary of really why it's so important.
Yeah, somebody else would take the fall for you, literally in the seesaw metaphor that we have here, but you really will end up throwing somebody else off, and they're going to get hurt. And so, is that your son, your daughter? Is it your father, your mother? Is it your wife? Is it your friend? Is it the church, buddy that you have? I mean, so essentially, carve out, like, get rid of your hobbies, get rid of your sports, get rid of your family, because you're going to go what? Be the very best leader for the fire department? That may work for a time, and then everything else is going to catch up to you. It's going to be like a tidal wave that crushes you.
Yeah.
And then you're going to drown. And so how do you maintain that balance and the seesaw effect? Really, really important to think about.
Yeah, and Admiral, I want to read this one line here that I think ties in perfectly. Deconditioning spirals usually manifest mildly at first, but the net result of slow implosion is that leaders no longer operate at peak performance and they are ultimately unable to bring their truly best selves to work. And I like how you mentioned that it manifests mildly at first, because like burnout just doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow burn, and you don't realize what's happening maybe sometimes, and then before you know it, there's all these impacts all around you that you could have predicted were going to happen, but you weren't really paying attention to them.
Yeah, people have done studies that show that burnout is a result of you using the same neural networks all the time. You're in this groove, right? And so all these other things in your life that need to be part of the color of your own rainbow, you need to still engage in them, because ultimately it allows your brain to then touch into these neural networks back and forth, and you don't end up with the burnout, and you're able to take sources of strength elsewhere and bring them over. They're fungible. They can go into some other part of your life, and you can draw off this, right? The love that you're been given by your family, that's a source of strength. Your athletic ability and your ability to sustain that's a source of endurance and strength, and example that you set, for others. Your spiritual side, however you want to define spiritual side, that can also be a source of strength for you. But if you leave those to sort of lie fallow, then those sources begin to dwindle. And then, like I said, what I've seen, my experience is that it really is very insidious. These are small things at first, but then the snowball just picks up, speed. And pretty soon people are like, when the breakage occurs, it's usually something dramatic, right? It's a wife that's in tears, or it's problems with the children during school, or it's something related to, a heart condition, blah, blah, blah. I mean, these are tales as old as time, right? You have to do self-care and balance the right way.
Well, and if your people are seeing you kind of melt down in your own world too, that all erodes trust as well, because then there's the lack of confidence that you're able to lead them if you can't lead your own life, which I realize is overly simplistic probably, but it all matters. It all chips away at that trust. It's all interconnected.
That's good. And I just add one more thought on this, and that is that if you become over obsessed in one area of your life, like every little decision that's there will carry what you think is something of tremendous consequence, which is anxiety producing. It can actually make you make poorer decisions because you think that everything is so important here. When you're engaged across a wider front, like those individual decisions just don't carry so much, overweight, right? And so sometimes people put too much stock into, something at work, and then if things go wrong, it blows up the rest of their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just can't, forget about it. They take their work home with them. They're moping around for the weekend. They get depressed. They're going to alcohol, using alcohol, all these things, right? So if you get over obsessed on one thing, it's typically not healthy.
Yeah. I think that's just a really great kind of emphasizing point that you have to obviously practice self-care. You have to be really self-aware. And if you don't, take time, it takes work to do that. Just like it does build and forging your team, you start with forging yourself. And as you are doing that, you can also forge your team, correct? Like you can do these things, in congruency and with each other. But there's always a process. You need to go back and forth between them. But let's talk a little bit about forging your team. So we talked about forging yourself. Now you're forging your team. What are some of the key takeaways there that you would, or shaping your team, I should say. Shaping your team. You forge yourself. You shape your team. What are the big takeaways that you want everybody to kind of understand about that?
Yeah, first of all, I think that climate is the most important thing to do when you're trying to shape the team. You have to invest in the climate. I had this saying that if you invest in your climate will invest in you. In other words, if you don't address the idea of kind of what's happening with the atmosphere, with the culture of your organization, if you don't put your hand against it, it can actually go in any different direction and you're not controlling it. You're not shaping it in the right way. So what you do to invest in culture, all the things that are not in your to-do list that are coming from your boss or coming from the world outside of you, they're not showing up in your inbox, they're not the emails you have to get to, whatever. These are things that you have to self-generate, where you take a look and go, it is important for me to set the right climate in this organization. And it doesn't matter if you're the number one person, you're number four, you need to be kind of working on those things. What kind of climate do I want? How do I create that kind of climate? What do I need to do to be purposeful in this regard? And how do I actually engage in a campaign of climate shaping over the course of my time in this assignment? This is really important, and most people neglect it, or they find out later when their climate is actually becoming something that creates problems, and they're wondering, why am I starting to see all these behavior issues, or people not following the rules or whatever? It's because the climate hasn't been self-supporting in such a way as it drives people to do right decisions for the right reasons, and in the right way. And so you end up having more problems, and you're in the consequence management business rather than the proactive work, which is to say, look, I'm going to do preventative things from the beginning. I'm going to create a sense that there's dignity, there's respect. We're going to talk about ethics. We're going to talk about these, uncomfortable issues here that will help me kind of get my philosophy across, set expectations for people, and to let people know, what they should be doing in a place like this. And so I think, climate is one of the ones I've seen over and over again when people didn't do anything to set the climate. Let's talk about the things that are truly uplifting, truly going to be useful to set the right parameters for behaviors that normally red lines are crossed, and then people are trying to fix problems and they're way behind the curve.
The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision we make as a company is about you, our customer. We wouldn't be where we are today without you, and we don't take that lightly. We understand that having the right gear can mean the difference between life and death. Our goal is to get you the gear you need, when you need it, at prices you can afford. Visit us at thefirestore.com for everything but the truck, and shop our family of brands, including Streamlight, MSA, Lion, Fleer, and more. Now let's get back to the show.
So, Admiral, one of the things that we see a lot, and I think it's come up in a lot of our surveys in the fire service, is about culture. And we've had some guests on that said, some chiefs aren't aware of their culture because they're not present within it. And, maybe they're in an office, and a lot of times chiefs will tell us, well, I spent so much time behind a desk, and I just, it's hard to get out to the stations, and it's hard to get into the battalions or wherever. What kind of things would you tell them to do? And is it too late if the culture's already formed?
No, it's never too late. I mean, I think that we all have a responsibility. The best cultures are the ones that actually become ones that are overseen and supported by people all the way down the ranks. And that they'll sustain it even when you're not around. If you have to be around for your culture to actually live out all the things, all the traits, all of the behaviors, all of the mores, et cetera, the values that you want to instill in that culture, then you don't actually have a working culture. You have something else. And so, it works when people take a look and go, I can get behind those values or what this stands for. I can understand that mission. I can understand my why, as Simon Sinek would put it, right?
Yep.
What is your why? And then your how comes into this, like how you actually execute your responsibilities, and what are the left and right boundary lines of behaviors that are acceptable. All of that kind of comes into play here. There are plenty of organizations in the military that are disaggregated, or they're off, sometimes halfway around the world from their parent organizations and their headquarters. And it is a challenge, right? There are new pressures, there's a new environment there. But the best leaders up and down the chain of command figure out a way to inoculate their people kind of before they go. If you're going halfway around the world, the best cultures reinforce those things to prepare people for undergoing, whatever challenge or suffering or isolation or whatever it is that they're going to experience. This isn't it, wait for something to implode. This is something you actively know that you've got to work with your outstations. And people are all over, this occurred during COVID as well, where we couldn't connect, couldn't come into the office. And so, cultures probably took a big hit in a lot of different places, but the best leaders, even when their people were operating virtually, managed to keep that culture together because they were purposely connecting with them, making sure that they were heard, that they solicited views, they asked after them, they showed a high care factor. They were able to communicate what was going on from the center all the way down to the very edges of the perimeter. And this, communications unto itself, always something that surveys tell people that, it's not perfect. Communications is always going to be a strategic challenge. And you have to be really good at it. It's like 7 different ways, 7 different times, right? To be able to communicate any one thing. So communications is a big part of ensuring your culture is continuing to be fed the right kind of material, because you throw garbage into it, right? Or you let garbage be thrown in from somewhere else, then the whole system becomes, something that, then seizes up on that garbage or spits garbage out. And that you can't allow to happen. And it will happen for neglect. And you have to be very intentional about these things.
You mentioned branding, and I thought that was a really interesting chapter about branding and building your team, and explain kind of where we miss out on branding.
Yeah, branding is pretty simple and straightforward. People want to get behind a flag or a symbol, or your coffee mug with your emblem on it. You get lots of coffee sales if you get the right emblem, and you won't if you don't. I mean, what inspires them to think that they're part of this, standard, this unit, this team? And sometimes we neglect the very importance of all of that. what your colors are, your symbols, your mottos, stuff like that really matters. And if you look at yourself and go, how are we doing on that score? And you see that there's something that just isn't there, or maybe it's dated and old and people can't get jazzed up by it anymore, or they can't get behind it, then it's up to you to consider those changes. Like, make something more, with it, hip, relevant for today, and have the gumption to be able to kind of modify. There are lots of different symbols that people have where they can keep the original symbols, but they've kind of refreshed and they've updated those over time. Yeah. And they really have done a great service to, the contemporary people that are, the ones who want to take pride in their organization or their team. So I say, hey, you can neglect branding at your, at your apparel there, because ultimately you want to have a unifying thing. And typically it comes in, those sayings, your brands, your symbols, your emblems and things like that. This may seem like really minor, but it actually affects the human spirit more than you would think.
Yeah, the example you used, can you just elaborate on the example? I think it's a great way to really hit home the point.
Yeah, so I was in a command at the U.S. Cyber Command up in Fort Meade, Maryland, and I got there and they didn't have a motto, or they didn't have an emblem, and so ultimately, we had a contest to see who could create the emblem, and we ended up with the Statue of Liberty's torch hand with ones and zeros kind of emanating out from the torch. And we also had the motto competition, and the one that won was lighting the way in cyberspace. And people loved the competition. They're like, hey, my thing could last forever. I could live in time immemorial by having been the guy or gal that created this motto or this symbol. And so people got jazzed up by it, and we made it a thing, right? And we rewarded the person that won on each of those categories. We kind of had a coming out party for that, and we did the mugs and the shirts and all the rest. And it brought this new excitement and passion about the organization, and it was really, a successful small thing, but it had big impact.
Well, and that's tough too. Ones and zeros, for those that don't understand, it's coding, correct? Right? Right. Sometimes not the most sexy, not the most motivating thing, but somehow you made that work. And I think that's just a great example of how, right, that changed your culture over there, correct? Like, you could visibly see people getting jazzed up over being there. And that kind of goes into transforming your world and bringing everything back to, that third part. Give us some examples of that, and, looking at, the challenges you've heard a little bit about fire service faces. What are a couple takeaways that we should be listening to you about on transforming our world?
Yeah, transforming your world. There are a lot of different challenges that exist when you're encountering this very, sometimes hostile or inhospitable place out there, whether it's because of competition that exists, or because there's just hardship when you finally deploy your team. You think you're ready, and then you encounter some really tough things. And so I talk about change, like enacting change is very hard to do, but that's your responsibility. If you see that there's a challenge that needs to be overcome, then you have to wade in there, and you have to realize that, in fact, you may be only one in a series of people that are attacking that change, and you have to be comfortable that you're number 2 or number 3 in the line, where only the change will be seen, or you may get breakthrough when the 9th or the 10th person continues to push on that same door, right? And with regard to change, for example, in the intelligence community, there's a very simple thing, a simple idea that was really challenging for my intelligence community. We wanted to have intelligence that we could downgrade to release to show the activities of the Russians and the Chinese and what they were doing around the world. And we knew we had, almost perfect knowledge of all their malign behavior in the United States and foreign countries. And you couldn't read about it in the newspaper. You couldn't read about it anywhere else. And there are ways to downgrade intelligence, but my culture in the intelligence community is no way. We're not taking any risks with sources and methods. And we said that's that's actually not fitting for a world that runs on the information environment. Like the information domain is the most important thing. And if you're going to contend with, a foreign country that wants to change the world order the way that it sees that it wants to rule the world and essentially push the United States into the descent, that you're going to have your own narrative. Your narrative's going to have evidence of what the other guy stands for and what's dangerous and what's threatening. And they need to be able to talk about your own, attributes and what you offer the world. And China was doing a very successful job of saying, hey, we're benevolent, we'll offer you connectivity and modernity. You want some cash, here's some capital. We got peaceful genes. We've never been a violent nation. All this BS that they've been running for a while. And finally, I talked to my combatant commander. I was out in the Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii. I was a director of intelligence. And I was talking with my commander about this. And I said, we probably need to get a letter to the director of national intelligence to say, we want you to actually declassify and sanitize intelligence so we can use it for our information campaigns. And the 4-star agreed to do that and said, hey, can we get anybody else on board? There are 11 combatant commanders. Those are geographic combatant commands positioned around the world, operating military forces. Some of them are functionals like Special Operations Command or Transportation Command or Strategic Command for nuclear weapons. And we got 9 of 11 of those combatant commanders to sign the same memo, essentially asking the Director of National Intelligence to release intelligence so that they could each individually support the information campaigns that they need to wage the truth. This wasn't making stuff up. This was like waging the truth with evidence. So this was the big change that I use as an example of one of my chapters in the book to say, this was slow going. Culturally, that, the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, none of these dudes wanted to, release anything because they're looking at the risk of action, of releasing. And we were saying, this is the risk of inaction. Like if you don't and you hold on to the stuff, you're omniscient with the truth, but the world doesn't know because we're not sharing kind of the facts of the case. So this change was slow. It was hard. And even when I left, it still hadn't been, something that we had sufficient breakthroughs on. But gradually, we've gotten a little bit better, but we're not actually wired for sound even today on it. Change. You got to set your expectations right. You got to approach it the right way. You got to, put in your effort be smart about how you do that. But you're going to have to kind of understand what can be achieved and what can't be achieved and say your serenity prayers as you go forward. That's one example of, how to transform your world.
And you had to market that well as well. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. You had to be able to not necessarily, sell that idea within a world that had that was never part of your vocabulary or even thought process, right? Like, did you have some waking hours going, man, how do I get buy-in for this? That is totally against kind of what we've been doing for the last 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, there's people talking about the frozen middle, where even when the seniors want to do something, that you can't get past all these hidebound regulations that have piled up over time, and anybody can veto something kind of down the ranks for any excuse, or they slow roll stuff, and if they don't want to do it, and all of those things are true. And I had to engage in countless conversations, writing articles, giving speeches, going back and raising the point wherever I went without being shrill. Like if I was going to go shrill on them, then they could write me off. But being calm, balanced, objective throughout, right, was the mode to pick. So your mode of how you're trying to enact change is really important. You want people, this is the whole thing. Do you get flies with vinegar or honey? And you have to use more parts honey, a few parts vinegar than the opposite, to be able to truly get people to finally kind of come your way, and without gloating. When it starts to occur, you should withdraw kind of in the background and let other people take credit. Like where you can get other people to take credit for the change, don't try to grab that back. No, if you're a change agent, you let that go and you go, yeah, that's a brilliant move. A really, and you reward the hell out of everybody that does it, right? and give them kind of what they need bureaucratically and institutionally to, get the positive feedback that then keeps the virtuous cycle going.
Yeah. Man, there's so much there for the fire service. For those that are listening that maybe are stuck in a culture that they are trying to change themselves, maybe from the middle part of it, I think that's a very good lesson that it can be done. It just, you need to be methodical with it. You need to have a plan. And most importantly, I think you need to have the right mode. And, and I know one of the things I battle is I get a little too passionate about making that change. And I think what you're saying and confirming here, Admiral, is great, but make sure that that passion matches the correct mode for who you are trying to bring that change to. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other little tidbits of information other than take a breath, have some good mentors around me for that?
Let me bring up another one here, because there's so many. Some of them have longer stories attached to them. I don't think you have that much time, but I
got all day, but
Yeah.
our listeners may not. But
I just want to bring up the issue of performance and morale. Some people pick, and I have a whole chapter on performance and morale, and I say essentially they're symbiotic. That if you're a great leader, right, you take a look at both of them and you're like, I want to have maximum performance at highest morale. That's my definition of success. Not maximum performance regardless of morale, or high morale regardless of performance, right? And so how do you get to the highest net average, knowing that morale is never, always, at the peak? It's like the stereo system with the green and the red kind of line going back and forth. How do you actually do that? Because if you're not careful, you'll pick one or the other. And some people say, well, it's just like the mission versus people, or mission and people. And I say, yes, it's mission and people. And then some things on certain issues are going to take more precedence, and you're going to have to go for more performance, and you have to take some, morale decrements in there. But a leader who is wise to bringing that up to the highest net average are the most successful ones, in my view. Because if you have high morale, you're more inclined to have talent that's available to you deploy itself voluntarily and passionately for your mission. If you allow the mission, this is like horsewhipping a unit, into this awesome performance for, a couple of weeks, right? And then when all's said and done, dust is settled, you get people are just like walking zombies, and you can't do that very, often. And in fact, that may be the thing that breaks the camel's back, and people are going to leave. They're like, I don't, this is not the way I expect to be treated. And so you're losing the dignity and the respect that they are owed in your workforce. So how do you actually balance those two? It's performance and morale together, symbiotic, thinking about how you manage both of those simultaneously all the time is the charge of a great leader. And the ones who do it right are amazing to watch, right? Yeah. And they do manage to tap into something that ends up rising, not just the intelligence of the people who are there, but something comes out in terms of the spirit and the passion. And you get the skill base, the skill sets, and the passion together. That's an unbeatable combo. It doesn't matter if you're in corporate America, or if you're on the battlefield, or you're somewhere in the education or the media environment. You get those things going, you're going to be an outright success, and you'll leave the competitors struggling behind you.
And I think that summarizes every little issue that we have in the fire service. From a standpoint of your point on, if you have high morale and you have high performers, you're also then going to have other people that are going to want to be there. So there's a recruitment issue right there. So instead of maybe looking outside of the fire service and saying, maybe we just, nobody wants to be a part of the fire service. Maybe we need to start saying why, and let's bring in and keep the people we got, give them that high morale, be that leader that wants people that want to be around and be a part of that organization. I think that is a great way, and maybe a lesson for all of us in the fire service. And I also look at, you look at NFL teams, you look at, sports organizations, you look at, as you said, military organizations. That's really should be the main goal and focus of it. And obviously that's the challenge with it, but very well said. And Janelle put on something here too. She said the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Yeah,
And
the whole t-shirt.
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
we find that it's in some beach shacks, right? You have that. So, I do think that accompanying what we talked about with regard to performance and morale, that leaders need to define reality and give hope to everything. And so, do you have a leader that can articulate what their reality of their situation is? After 9/11, you had people that were able to define this tragedy, the reality, what it meant, and people were attached to some of those leaders, whether it was Bush or was somebody else, and so we were able to lead ourselves through a crisis. So redefining reality as reality changes around you, and describing it and letting people understand what shifted in this world around us, and what does it mean for us, and then what are we going to do about it? It gives a little bit of the vision thing attached to it. Defining reality in these terms is really important to have these ongoing discussions so that people understand now what is their culture up against and what's going to be asked of them, and how are they going to achieve their objectives. That's also a very important trait of a leader, to be able to give that to their people. And when they can't or they don't, then people feel adrift. You can have a perfect culture that's been created up to that point, but when you get your challenge, without a leader that can actually describe what that challenge is and how you're going to go about dealing with it, even if it takes years to deal with it, right? Then you're going to have a problem, right?
Is it okay for that leader to say, I don't know how we're going to handle that at this point? Is it okay for them to say that?
Absolutely, at any time, to be able to say, I'd like your help to think through this. I'm going to form, a number of different, surveys, or, I'd like to talk to my, senior leaders about it. If you have ideas, forward them in. All those kind of words, buy loyalty, and, people feel like they're going to be part of the solution. And so there is an opening before a leader may do that, where they want to, take some advice. Sometimes it's with a relatively small circle. Sometimes it's a big circle. It depends what the challenge is. But those kind of leaders, the ones that know when they should be opening the door to that, and then when to, move out with what they've got, are going to be, I think, the right ones to move an organization forward. And so I would go back to another quote about leadership too. This is the one I like the most, that leadership is about inspiring others to do more than they think themselves capable. And the point of that is to say that we don't even know what our capabilities are as humans. You don't even know until you're maybe supremely tested what you're capable of. Leaders need to tap into that underexploited potential, and they need to make people see that their best days are still ahead of them, that there's way more they can become and way more that they can do, right? A good leader will say, essentially, we've been doing good, we can do even greater things because I believe in us, and because I believe our team is unstoppable in achieving whatever. And so this idea that you're unfinished, that you still have your most amazing days ahead of you, that's where a leader can especially in a time of trial, a time of suffering, when maybe you can't get rid of the anguish, but you can provide that hope for people to be able to take on whatever they're facing, no matter how evil, dangerous, toxic, challenging it is, no matter how daunting it is. The good leaders imagine what you can do, and they take you over the next couple of ridge lines to the far horizon. Or you have leaders that are stuck on the near horizon.
Mm-hmm.
They're just trying to battle through kind of whatever comes in front of them. And so that's the difference between leadership as well, where you find you need to develop people and elevate those who seem to have an aptitude to be able to do what I just said, because it doesn't come with just age, right? It doesn't come with, you may find somebody that's, particularly young, that has that trait, and you need to help buoy their career and move them into places where they can continue to kind of grow And in some cases, you advance them through more quickly because you realize how valuable they are to be able to deliver that kind of thing. It's absolutely indispensable.
Yeah. I love the analogy of buoy, naval analogy there. And I'm going to steal that. Yeah, that was so good. And obviously I love hope. I think, good leaders instill hope in people. And we saw that through COVID. And I think, in certain organizations within the fire service and obviously, you can look now through organizations where their leaders do inspire, provide, and support hope. And I hope, speaking on that, our listeners got some really good, insightful things like I did. I highly recommend to anybody listening to really get the book. And where's the best place to get the book, Admiral?
Yeah, Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Fire Integrity can be found at Stone Tower Press, which is my publisher, Stone Tower Press, JPL. You can also get on Amazon. They've had a little quirky thing. Hopefully they've solved it by the time this show airs, but it has actually been out in paperback for 4 to 5 months now. You can get a Kindle. That's available. That's easy on Amazon. You should be able to get the paperback through there too. And if you do it through Amazon, I'd appreciate doing a review if you can afterward. That'd be really much appreciated. And then I just finished doing an audio book. So maybe before Christmas, the audio version, which I personally recorded, will also be out.
Well, they got a little sneak peek of what's going to be that audio version right here. And again, I can't thank you enough. Janelle, unbelievable job getting the Admiral here on us, our program. And I think there's so many usable things that were said throughout, the entire episode. I have tons of notes. I read the book. I'm going to go back and read because there's some things I'm like, oh yeah, I missed that part of it. I took a lot of snapshots of some of the quotes and the stories within it. And I just can't thank you enough for sharing your insights. I believe they wholeheartedly apply to what we're experiencing here in the fire service. And again, our listeners, I think, got some great stuff from you. But you're not done yet. Admiral, you thought that the first 50 minutes or an hour was tough. We like to put our guests on something that we call the hot seat, where we just kind of dive into some quick hitters. But they're tough. I think we stumped a couple of our last guests, so we'll see how you do today. This is Janelle's favorite segment, so I'm going to have her begin, of course.
All right.
Okay, Admiral. If you had to start your career over from day one, what would you do differently?
If I was joining the military, I wouldn't do anything differently. I don't believe in looking back and second guessing yourself. I think you make the best decisions at the time, and then you move on and you make the best of this. And so I wouldn't go back and second guess. Although there are two career paths, I've been tempted to look back and go, the other one, that your high school, remember you can take that survey where it says what
the
you
preference
would be
test.
by filling out your I was either going to be a military officer or I was going to be a National Geographic, photojournalist traveling the world. So I sometimes wonder, what if I had taken that photojournalist? I'm not sure which one would have allowed me to see more of the world. I suspect maybe the Navy did.
Yeah, pretty much. For our listeners that are younger, there's these things called magazines that used to be out. National Geographic used to be one. It was, you'd actually read it and have the pictures, really good pictures from all over the world. I just had to get that little shot in there for some of our younger generation there. This is my favorite question. Of course, when we come up with these, Janelle's like, I guess I got to let you ask this one. But I want to know, what's the wildest Navy moment that you can share on the pod?
Well, flying off aircraft carriers is pretty darn wild. And so I ended up with 40 hours in the A6 Intruder, which is a medium tack aircraft from the USS Saratoga. And before Desert Storm, I had lots of hours launching off the deck and flying around and doing dogfights and other things in the air, and then landing on aircraft carriers. So that was pretty wild stuff. We had some port visits early on in my career, which got pretty wild, but nothing like Daytona Beach or anything.
Yeah, what's the craziest antic? Like, I mean, there's some jokies going on on the aircraft carrier. I mean, yeah, there's got to be some gags. You got to just share one thing,
Yeah.
because the firehouse is probably fairly similar.
Yeah,
I
check.
imagine.
Okay, if you have time. So I was a bull ensign, which means I was a senior ensign, 01 first officer rank during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And during Desert Shield, we had a port call in Antalya, Turkey, and we set up what we call admins, which are just locations in a hotel room that the squadron can just use as a base for people to launch out a crash, if they need in the night. You usually have what we call your drinking flag, and it was the squadron flag, and ours was the Black Panthers. It was a big pouncing Black Panther, and it got stolen, and it was the bull ensign's responsibility to always protect the drinking flag. And so my squadron commanding officer, livid, everybody was like looking at me, how are you going to get that back? And we finally, I had to be an intelligence officer on this, finally learned that it was another fighter squadron that had snaked it. And we had to go fight a war. So we kind of lost track of this, issue, obviously. But when the war stopped, we had another 3 weeks in the Red Sea before we could leave. And I engineered stealing the drinking flag of this F-14 squadron from their ready room. And actually it was a wooden emblem of their squadron, and it was big and heavy. And I did like an emergency issue to get the duty officer out. We got it, and I started taking pictures of it all over the aircraft carrier, going up the elevator to the flight deck, in the mess, in the laundry room, like in the admiral's briefing room, like on the bridge, everywhere. And I'd send the commanding officer a photo every few days saying, when are you going to give us the drinking flag back? And it was so embarrassing, you got livid. And then finally we engineered a swap, and it was up near the forward areas where most of the officers live. And something went wrong during the swap, and we ended up doing this huge wrestling match back and forth, this sea of pilots and aviators and intel officers that were like struggling for who knows what reason. And it was like the most cathartic thing after a war where we had, some casualties. And that's how we spent our time recovering our drinking flag. But I'll tell you, it was really important for us to have that, to get back down to reality and, recover from, something that most people should never have to encounter in terms of combat.
Yeah, probably the process on both sides, getting theirs and you getting yours, are kind of the joke. We joke, but there's some recovery in that, right? There's some necessity behind that,
Yeah, it was fun loving. It wasn't anything evil. It was something that actually brought the squadrons closer together than any of the other squadrons there. So in the end, we had a big laugh about it, and yeah, and I was redeemed at the end of the group.
Did when you retired, did they give you one of the flag?
Our squadron, we have all sorts of paraphernalia, but no, the squadron flag stays with the squadron. But our squadron is very, very close. We have annual get-togethers, usually timed at the beginning of Desert Storm, January 16th every year. And so, yeah, our squadron group is really tight to this day.
Yeah, well, because of that, right? That's stuff like that brings you all together.
So many things that included.
Yeah. Well, and talk about bringing everything together. The program has obviously benefited. Our listeners have really benefited from all your knowledge. It's all about being a better version of yourself. As we say, within the shift or day or second, it doesn't matter. It's all about self-improvement. So I got to bring it home with the final question. Admiral, how are you getting better?
I am getting better by getting back into shape physically. I have pretty good base. I do adventure races. I do other things, but I can be better, and I want to do some ultras and things like that. So, that's one area of my life. I believe in the Greek view of mind, body, spirit. It's all supporting one another. Spending more time with my family and my wife. I'm going to take her on a vacation in January down to South America, and we're going to be really purposeful about that. So I'm trying to strike the right kind of balance there on the family side, as busy as I am still in retirement. And then professionally, look, the world is changing around us. The geopolitics, the macro geopolitics are pretty scary. Staying tuned in, being fresh requires overseas travel, other things. So I can come back and I can add, whatever advice and consulting services I can provide in various places. I make myself better by making sure that I am up on all of the issues of the day, whether it's China, Russia, or anything else. So life is like that. You never get to say, I'm content to say I've conquered this, that, and the other. The hill continues, the mountain still rises in front of you, and you got to keep taking it step by step.
Yeah. I think that brings it back full circle. You're working on yourself. You're still staying connected. You're doing the things that you talk about in the book. Again, the book, Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity. I highly recommend go out and get it, read it. It is a, believe it or not, for me, it was a fairly quick read. At least once I got into it, the chapters are nice and condensed, and you actually do have some really great points at the ends of them. So they're really, as I like to say, firefighter or fire truck guy. We have a smaller attention span, but it really meshes well with how we learn, and very well done. Again, Admiral, thanks so much for being here. So many good bits of information. For our listeners, you can email us. We can get you in touch with the Admiral. Better every shift at firerescue1.com. We'd love if you rated, reviewed, shared the show. Let us know what you think. Are we on something or onto something? But most importantly, thank you for listening. And I'm going to preemptively thank you for sharing. And Admiral, thank you so much for the insights, for your time. For those that are listening, again, go get Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity. And I guarantee you will take away some things that you can use that day, that moment, the next day, wherever, with your crew about forging yourself, shaping your team, and transforming your world. Because when everything comes down to it, we're all listening to this program. We're all in this world. As I like to say, a band is a band of misfits that are looking to learn something, do something, and share something to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for listening, everybody.